They normally happen on a night just like this. They come from nowhere and frighten normally sane people almost to death. First it's spacecraft with strange lights in the night sky, then weird creatures on the ground with odd-shaped heads bathed in brilliant light. Aliens, beings from outer space. Do they really exist? Well, some of the greatest academics in the world say yes. So too do ordinary people, people who have seen them. What you are about to experience is all true.
First thought was, they're here, they're here.
3.5 to 4.5 feet tall.
Long-limbed, big heads, insect-like looking.
They've come for me most times in the middle of the night, sometimes in the daytime.
They are very, very intelligent.
I remember yelling at these things and saying, stop this, I hate what you're doing to me.
I was shaking, I was really trembling, and every cell in my body was like I was afraid. I was terrified.
It happens anytime, anywhere, over and over, to those who share an experience they cannot entirely define. Like many who say they are abductees, Peter Faust has been visited many times. They have taken him to their ship. He never knows when they will return.
What happens after I'm hit with the light is that I'm taken aboard a ship. Normally I'm placed on a table. The beings kind of look at me, probe me, sometimes take sperm samples. Look in my eyes, my ears, that type of thing. And then after that, I'm usually taken into another room, and I'm literally shown events of the Earth. They've showed me future, what seems to me to be future cataclysmic events that where the Earth is headed.
They came for a woman we will call Susan. Her children have seen them too. Like many of the others, she is afraid to talk openly about what has happened to her.
The next thing I remember is being in the air, going up, away from the highway, just sort of floating. I have the feeling of two beings beside me, but I cannot see them, and going into a ship. And then I was examined. They did some sort of procedure. On my left side, it's sketchy memories. It's almost as though time was cut, and I don't have a continuous memory. It's very disjointed, and it's very disturbing.
Marketing executive Joan Victoria says she has been visited since childhood.
They were these 5 beings, these small, short type of life forms. And I remember running to the back door of my parents' home, trying to get in. And I remember being taken up and feeling very, very compacted, and then being in the dark, and then seeing a really fine beam of light and realizing I was traveling toward that beam. I can't even convey to anybody the terror that was felt by that child at that time. It's just, it would take, literally your breath away because you were so afraid.
Dr. John Mack is a respected Harvard psychiatrist and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Despite a reputation and a career to lose, he insists publicly that he has over 90 patients who have been abducted by aliens. Today, his professional life is devoted to his program for extraordinary experience research.
Clinically, I judge them to be speaking authentically, not getting this from some other source, not displacing from some trauma. It is what it is. And I say that, and I ask my critics, find one, the beginning of an explanation that accounts for this entire phenomenon. And then there's silence.
Each thought he was alone, almost hoped to be found delusional. Instead, they found they share an extraordinary reality with hundreds of others. Each story like all the others.
I mean, you put me through psychological testing to rule out delusions, to rule out sexual abuse or child abuse or any psychosis or neurosis that the normal psychiatric community would say were the reasons for these memories.
Yes, actually, you came out healthier than the average of the population, I want you to know.
One of the most convincing facts to Dr. Mack is that so many tell the same story. Many have conscious memories of their abductions. Some remember only fragments. But in hypnotic regression sessions with Dr. Mack, memories become very real.
You can't do this to me. I want to say no, you can't do this to me. Just can't do this to me anymore. Stop it!
In this tape made 2 years ago by Canada's CBC television, Peter hears one of his own regression sessions for the first time.
Just do this anytime you want. Oh.
I see. What's happening?
They're taking me.
Where are you?
I'm laying on a table.
How old are you?
18, 19.
Want to express it more? The anger?
It's a trauma on 4 levels. It's a trauma because the thing itself is so traumatic, to be helpless, to be taken against your will and subjected to these intrusive rape-like procedures. It's traumatic because of the isolation that people feel. They can't talk about it. The parents will say, well, that's your dream again, or your nightmare. Thirdly, it is philosophically shocking to people's worldview. I mean, this is not supposed to be. This, in our worldview, this is beyond extraordinary. It's impossible. And then the fourth thing is that it can recur at any time. I mean, it's not like other traumas that are over when they're over. They can be taken again.
It was clear from the beginning that the sperm that was being taken from me was for some reason. And I wasn't sure of that, but I was aware that it had something to do with breeding and reproducing. And then it became clear to me later that I was somehow producing offspring.
I have been presented with children that are half human, half alien, and been told that they're mine. From the stories that I'm hearing from others, it seems like there is a widespread breeding program going on.
Susan insists she has carried alien pregnancies.
I started to lose my waist. After about 4 months, it became unmistakable. I could feel the baby rolling and kicking. I had colostrum come in.
Now this is critical. Your husband
Had had a vasectomy, yes. It was not his child, obviously, and I'm as faithful as the day is long. I had no explanation for it. Between the time that I went to see Dr. Mack and then the time that I went to see the gynecologist, the baby was taken. And I woke up in the morning knowing that the child was gone.
Susan says every member of her family has seen the aliens. Both your children have had encounters.
My daughter has had one encounter where she woke up around 7 in the morning to find a gray alien standing in her bedroom. I was woken up to hear my daughter screaming. When my son has things happen, typically I will have the same thing happen the same night. He'll talk about the little man coming.
Susan says her husband never believed her until he had an experience of his own.
My husband didn't believe me at first, which I fully understand. Here he is sleeping in the bed next to me, and he wasn't seeing anything. This went on for about 6 months with me trying to convince him. Finally, when I got to the deepest level of frustration, they came to the bedroom one night and showed themselves to him. And from that day on, he's been a staunch supporter. He believes because he's seen them.
Peter's wife, Jamie, faced an impossible choice. Either her husband was crazy, or what he experienced was real. A powerful experience that she is excluded from, perhaps forever.
I think that what affected me the most is that in feeling the withdrawal in our relationship and then finding out that there was a female alien that Peter was connected with, it felt that he couldn't, there was a time when I said, it doesn't feel like you're here with me. You know, are we in relationship here together or what? And his answer was, no, I'm not here totally with you. I am split. The emotional splitting, like a splitting of his heart, perhaps we might say, that it's half here and half there. So that the full longing of connection with me wouldn't be possible. And that was really upsetting.
I feel a split very often between here and my commitment to my life here. And that includes Jamie, that includes my profession, that includes my friends and family and everything that I know and am working towards here on Earth. And what I also feel is this deep involvement with the extraterrestrials, and that I've had some kind of ongoing relationship with them since I was a child. It appears that there's going to be some future event that I'm going to be involved in, or at least that's the feeling I have, and that when that time comes, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's a constant conflict in my marriage, in my profession, in my life, just in my everyday existence. So I have to keep reminding myself that I am Peter, I am married, I am a human, I live here, I have a job, I have my work, my clients, and that this is what's important today. And when and if the ETs show up, then I'll deal with that when it happens.
It's my honest feeling that this is a spiritual awakening, a growth process. I think the time has come where they're trying to contact us.
Some intelligence is entering into our world that we do not control, that is not simply a projection of the human mind, and that intelligence has a purpose of some sort.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. What type of aircraft is it?
Delta Sierra Juliet. I cannot affirm. It is for bright, and it seems to me like landing lights.
Delta Sierra Juliet, roger.
Is there any Air Force aircraft activity in the vicinity?
Delta Sierra Juliet, there is no known aircraft in your vicinity.
It was a clear Saturday night when Flight Services Officer Steve Roby became the last person to have any contact with a young pilot by the name of Frederick Valentich.
At speeds 2-3 times I could not identify.
I personally don't think that he fabricated his disappearance.
Like many, Valentich's family, particularly his father Guido, believe he was taken by something from another world.
I believe that he was involved with an extraterrestrial.
UFO expert Paul Norman investigated Frederick Valentich's disappearance. His verdict? Definitely a close encounter of the first kind.
As far as I'm concerned, it was a genuine UFO.
It's just on 14 years since Frederick Valentich's desperate radio call from over Bass Strait. To this day, no trace has been found of him or his plane. Why not? Can someone simply disappear off the face of the Earth? It was 3 days before that fateful night that Valentich started down the road that would end in his destruction. On October 18, 1978, a young civil pilot went to Melbourne's Moorabbin Airport trying to hire a plane.
G'day. G'day. I'd like to hire a plane to fly to King Island.
The weather's closing in Bass Strait. It's too dangerous to fly there today.
I've flown in bad weather many times before.
3 days later, he was back. The weather was fine, and Frederick Valentich got the okay to fly to King Island. When VHDSJ was cleared for takeoff, Off, all was normal, except for one thing. Valentich had not alerted anyone on King Island that he was coming. No one called, so there was no one there to turn on the landing lights.
Clear for takeoff, 320, 10 to 15.
If anyone should have known a light plane was on its way to King Island, it was Brian Jones. As flight service supervisor, it was his job to light the runway for incoming night traffic.
I remember the day quite well. It was a Caulfield Cup day, and I've been playing golf.
Brian, phone call.
When I got a phone call to say that an aircraft was missing across Bass Strait, which was Delta Sierra Juliet, the Cessna 172.
It should have been a routine 69-minute flight from Moorabbin, along the coast to Cape Otway, out over Bass Strait and on to King Island. But as the drama was unfolding in the night sky, other strange events were about to unfold on the ground.
On that night, I decided I'd go up in the area outside the hut and take the sun setting in the beautifully into the west. I took a series of photographs, about 6 in all, at around about 15, 20-second intervals, and that was it.
Roy Manifold never saw or heard the mysterious object he caught on film. He could not explain the image he'd captured, and nor could Kodak.
They come back and they said, oh, there's definitely not a developing error. It's nothing to do with the film or the development of the film on the print, but they couldn't explain what it was and why it was there.
Paul Norman had no doubts what was on the film. He sent the photos to the laboratories of Ground Saucer Watch in America. What they discovered was a solid, metallic object about 7 meters in diameter, about 2 kilometers out to sea.
It was an unknown object rising from the water, and it had a lot of mist around it, indicating it did come from the water.
After takeoff, all was normal for a while. Valentich made routine contact with air traffic control at Tullamarine. It was 19 minutes past 6. The weather was good, visibility excellent, with scattered clouds and light winds. Then came the concerned call. It was to be the last conversation Frederick Valentich ever had.
Melbourne Delta Sierra Juliet is not an aircraft, it is...
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne, can you describe the aircraft?
Delta Sierra Juliet, as it's flying past, it's a long shape.
Few people had ever heard these words. The exact words uttered by Frederick Valentich in his last call to air traffic control.
Melbourne, it's approaching now from due east towards me.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne.
Delta Sierra Juliet, he seems to be playing some sort of game. He's flying over me at speeds 2-3 times I could not identify.
Delta Sierra Juliet, roger. And how large would the object be?
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me.
On King Island, life was going on as normal. But some did report strange lights in the sky, as did scores of others on the Victorian mainland.
There were more daytime sightings reported on that same day in any period of activity I've ever investigated.
In my mind, knowing my son, I was sure that he was encountered something very seriously, because he would never go on that radio and compromise his future career as a pilot.
It is hovering and it is not an aircraft.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. Delta Sierra Juliet. Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne.
At 7:12 and 28 seconds, those were Frederick Valentich's last words. Then a long and loud metallic sound.
The engine had the characteristics, for example, electromagnetic effect.
Frederick Valentich was never heard from again. At this moment, he simply vanished. When Brian Jones was finally alerted, it was already too late.
A distress phase had been raised on the aircraft, and they wanted me to get out to the airport here, turn on the runway lights and start calling the aeroplane. Delta Sierra Juliet, this is King Island. If you're reading me and cannot transmit, I'll give you the service conditions. The wind is calm, QNH 1028, sky clear, runway lights are on, and no traffic for your descent. We took off and we flew due north to Cape Wickham Lighthouse, which is the northern tip of the island. It was an unreal night. It was kind of strange for this part of the world. There was no wind, and when we got out to sea just north of Wickham Lighthouse, you could actually see the reflection of the stars in the water.
Jones's plane was the first to search in the area. Over the next 4 days, it was joined by civilian and military aircraft, including an RAAF Orion, which has special sensors for tracking metal in water. But not a trace of Valentich or his plane were found. The facts so far: Valentich was flying a single-engine Cessna alone on a clear, still night. There was no other aircraft known to be in the area. Numerous people reported seeing strange lights in the sky all around the Victorian coast. Roy Manifold captures something on film that to this day has not been explained. And Frederick Valentich reports being buzzed by a mysterious flying craft. For Guido Valentich and his family, the mystery has been a 14-year nightmare, made worse by the fact they still don't know the fate of their son.
Good morning, sir. I'm after Mr. Valentich.
That's me.
Mr. Valentich, can you tell us where your son is, thanks?
No, he's supposed to come back from King Island last night. The worst things that might happen to him would have been being abducted by some unknown civilization, and that possibly will take, we don't know how many years before we'll be able to see him again. In my heart, I do believe that one day I will see him again.
I don't feel that he staged his disappearance.
I'm quite open on it. I really don't know.
He possibly went on could be a suicide mission.
There was a real encounter with an unknown flying object.
Valentich's girlfriend Rhonda Rushton had flown with him on every flight except his last. In a strange postscript to this story, Rhonda travelled to this motel for a rendezvous planned before his disappearance. The motel manager claims Rhonda asked for Valentich, and when told he wasn't there, seemed visibly upset. This was 7 days after his last fateful radio call.
Isn't he the young lad that went missing over
Had she finally come to grips with the fact that his disappearance was not a hoax? To this day, this event remains unexplained, as does the disappearance of Frederick Valentich. If you were abducted by aliens, would you tell anyone? Could you face the ridicule, the mocking, the whispers? Most people would say you'd gone mad. That could have happened to Andrew if scientists hadn't said his story was quite feasible.
It was on the 4th of February 1992. That evening was something of which I will never forget. I was very restless. In fact, I couldn't get to sleep. Consequently, from there on in, I must have dozed off. But what happened from there on in, I really don't know how it happened, but it happened.
According to Andrew, what happened was this. Suddenly, he was awake. Somehow, he had been transported and was standing in this car park outside a basketball stadium. A stadium that's located 50 kilometres from his home on the outskirts of Perth. He had no idea how he got there, but he did know he was not alone. He was surrounded by more than 30 strangers.
I turned to this person alongside me and I said, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" This person looked at me and without using the spoken word, just said virtually through my mind, "You're lucky to be chosen." And this blue light appeared from such a small dot and got larger and larger until finally it intensified to such magnetism that it was virtually over the top of us, and a brilliant white flash is all I recall. The very next thing was I was inside this basketball hall.
Andrew's confusion turned to fear. Again, he was not alone, but now there was something sinister about his companions.
They took on a human-like figure. The thing that distinguished them most of all, that were different from humans, were their eyes. Their eyes were, to me, they resembled as if they were out of focus.
My first impressions, formed over several hours, were that the chap in question is definitely sincere and seems convinced that what he experienced actually happened.
Professor John Frodsham from Murdoch University in Perth is president of the Australian Society of Psychical Research. He's investigated many cases of this kind and has conducted lengthy interviews with Andrew and his family.
I must say that I hadn't encountered anything quite like this before, because although abduction cases now are becoming 10 a penny, or a dime a dozen, there are very few of them in which the abductee is transported, as our case alleged he was transported, from one locality to another.
But Andrew says this was not his first encounter, nor was it to be his last.
When I was 7 years old, they had been to see me before and they had given this gift to me.
The gift was a cricket bat, and memories of that childhood experience flooded back to him 34 years later as he stood in the basketball stadium.
The whole place was abuzz. The lights were on, everything was happening. And I noticed people were receiving gifts from these things. One of them came over to me and offered me a gift. I looked at it and I thought to myself there and then, what is this? As I looked down towards what I was given, it was a cricket bat.
Was it a reminder of the previous visit? Andrew says he doesn't know because of what happened next.
There was one of these things kneeled down, accepting my emotions, my feelings, everything that I was feeling. It was accepting and drawing in, as if it was robbing me, depriving me of my own thoughts. I felt aggravated, I felt violated, I became very angry. And consequently, I dropped the gift that I was given. I looked over towards the others and I said, "This is not what it seems. Get out of here." I got to the exit doors within the hall and everything just went brilliant white. The next thing I remember, I was back on my bed to where I must have dozed off asleep, and the first thing that I remembered was waking up and seeing the time. It was 2:15 a.m.
But Andrew's story doesn't end there. Exactly a month later, at 2:30 a.m. on March the 4th, 1992, he was jolted out of his sleep by an intense blue light. Through the glare, he saw someone or something.
It was definitely a figure. It stood approximately 4 foot, maybe 4'6" high, no taller. What was incredible was the fact that my son was being guided down the passageway by this thing. It was at this point that I noticed that my body was paralyzed. My mind was completely functional, but my body wouldn't respond. It was only when this blue misty-like figure had disappeared from my sight did I gain the strength enough to be able to get off the bed and go and grab my son.
Andrew says that's when the figure vanished in a flash of white light. The next thing he remembers is finding his 10-year-old son tucked up in bed, safe but very pale and shaken. The boy was well enough to go to school next morning, but not long after, there was another mysterious problem.
We were sitting down eating a lamb roast, and consequently, what had happened was we'd just all finished our dinner, and my son had an irritation at the back of his throat.
And this is what he coughed up when he cleared his throat. Andrew's theory is that the tiny metal object could have been implanted in the boy by the strange nocturnal visitor on March the 4th.
If it should turn out to be made of an unusual metal, an unusual alloy, that's to say an alloy which is not encountered here on Earth, then of course we have a very strong lead indeed.
Well, we've since had the object tested by experts at Curtin University in Perth. These are photographs of it taken under a powerful spectrograph. And the university's verdict? The object is most likely a computer component manufactured in Sweden. That verdict aside, Andrew stands by his story and adds one final twist. He says his two children sighted unidentified flying objects hovering near their house back in March 1992. And he's worried that for his family, the story is far from over.
I feel a lot of fear. I fear the fact that I don't know what I'm dealing with here. I feel they're coming back. They are coming back. They told me they'd be back in 5 of our Earth years. 5 years was the time at which they'll come back and they'll see my son again. Against my wishes, there is nothing I can do. I feel completely helpless. There's no one I can turn to, there's no one I can trust.
Many sightings are those of a single nature. That is, one person seeing something he or she can't explain. Often they're dismissed as imagination. But when 4 people see the same thing, describe the same craft, experience the same fear, the subject takes on a frightening new dimension. 4:30 a.m., July the 24th, 1994. The terror begins. Terror that would haunt 4 women day after day, week after week, until they were never safe, not even in their own homes.
It's nothing I've ever seen, and it's definitely what you'd say is a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object. Never seen anything like it in my life.
In the early hours of that July morning, the women were on their way home after a reunion with old friends. They were tired, but it was only a 15-minute drive. Tina and Grace were in the front, Joy and Victoria in the back. Grace was driving. Suddenly, her attention was diverted from the road ahead.
I noticed these orange lights, like very long, oblong-shaped, lots of them, like in a big row.
Even now, the 4 women are nervous talking about their ordeal and want their identities kept secret.
You didn't know what to think of it at first because it was multicolored. It had lots of lights and it went like a strobe light would go, and it had incredible movement in the sky, and there was nothing that would move around like it ever.
They asked me what I thought it was. I said, it's a star. But it was moving, so it couldn't have been a star. So I thought maybe it's a satellite. And being sceptic, I didn't want to think what they were thinking. So in the end I said, well, I won't believe it unless it's on my tail.
As it turned out, prophetic words indeed. Grace put her foot down, tried to outdistance the lights.
And I was the first one to turn around, and it was like a sunset, orange, huge, that was hovering behind the car.
The back of the car was just lit up so brightly, which then I turned around and there was this huge, bright, sort of like the sun, it was so bright. And I just was overwhelmed with fear, which then I turned to Grace and I said, step on it, let's get out of here.
They thought safety was in sight. A parking lot, deserted, dark, but not for long.
I had slammed my hand onto the security lock to lock all the doors, but it was too late because Joy had jumped out of the car and gone to the back of the car to see where it had gone.
All of a sudden, this thing was over the top of us, and it was just huge, and it hovered.
And you didn't have to stretch your neck or look very high up or anything like that. It would have only been as high as a telegraph pole.
They were afraid, very afraid. Strange lights, obviously following them, harassing them. Why?
Grace was upset, made us get back in the car. She was really scared, so we all got back in the car. And then we went to drive off. And that's when we noticed about 5 or 6 other things in the sky, but they were heaps smaller, real small.
Grace accelerated. The lights did too. It seemed there was no escape, until at last they came to a driveway, a farmhouse. The lights, the craft on their tail. Frantic, Grace honked the car horn. No response, nothing. The 4 women were alone.
And then 2 lights sort of come from the left. It looked like they landed. And they were pretty close, but there was a lot of trees sort of on the boundary of the property. The girls in the front, that's when they said, "Did you see that?"
Their worst fears were about to be confirmed. A shadow fell across the blinding lights. A figure appeared, coming closer and closer. A silhouette, almost human, but not quite. Weird, ominous.
Just what impressed me was that it was so little. It was no more than 3 or 4 foot, and it looked like a little person.
And that is all they remember. That figure advancing toward them.
Like a shadow came over it, and it was like it was just gone. You couldn't see it. I just started that car up, and I reversed it out so fast and just took off like crazy.
The lights disappeared, and the 4 women thought the nightmare was over. But it was just beginning. First, the mystery of the missing time. It was now 6 a.m. and they'd set out at 4:30.
You know, I mean, it's a 15-minute drive at the best of times. And even if you know, with the stops that we made and you allowed, you know, a couple of minutes here or there, you could account for a half an hour, but you can't account for an hour and a half.
What happened to the 4 women during that missing hour? Where did the lights, the craft, the figure come from? They are questions which remain unanswered.
It wasn't a plane. It definitely wasn't a plane. It was just too low. A plane would have dropped out of the sky. It was just too low, too big.
I definitely think I saw a craft. I definitely think I saw a little person from one of those.
That frightening night would not be put to rest. It would return to haunt each of the 4 women. There were the after effects: migraine headaches, nosebleeds, dizzy spells, and, in Grace's case, terrifying flashbacks.
I found it very hard to sleep. There was times that I sensed, don't ask me how because I really don't know, but I just knew there was something in my room. And this went on for quite a time. It got to a stage where I just didn't want to go to bed. I didn't want to sleep because I was so scared.
Grace dreaded being at home, alone. There was that uneasy feeling that she was under surveillance, being watched. Just a feeling, nothing tangible, until...
Little white, bright, practically even like a bluey haze around them, light that was moving around on the wall. And I'd sort of get up and go and touch something to sort of see if I could get a reflection, if it was something, always to see what could this be, but it was nothing. They'd sort of move about frantically and then disappear.
Grace felt isolated. There was no one she could turn to, no one except her 3 friends. Several weeks after the first encounter, they gathered at Tina's house. That was when the lights appeared again. Tina drew the blinds, refusing to believe the worst, that it was all about to begin again.
We thought, well, we didn't know where they came from, but we just sort of watched them with the blinds down, sort of when they blended together, asked them to move around in certain directions just to see if they, you know, whatever it was, would do it, and it did. The lights moved around in whatever direction you told it to go into, whether it was up and down or right and left or, you know, it didn't matter. You know, jump to the other wall, it just did.
This went on for about, you know, a couple of minutes, and then it just disappeared. It was completely gone.
Grace, by now, was on the brink. It seemed there was nowhere left to hide. Wherever she turned, the lights were there, taunting her, tormenting her, even as she drove through the suburbs.
I noticed the same light, with the blue light around it. I noticed this thing in the sky, and I mean, my heart started pounding like mad, and I was really scared. I wanted to turn around and go back, but at that stage I thought, if I go back, my husband's gonna think, you know, you really lost it. It was as if this thing was following me. That's the way I felt. I mean, that's just the way I felt, you know.
Back home that night, Grace was calmed by her husband. The family settled down, tried to sleep, and then...
At about 12:15, my son woke me, stood beside my bed, and he was beside himself, and he was crying and shouting. And I was like, you know, what's wrong with you? And he was saying, there's somebody in my room. I was screaming for you, so you didn't come.
Raced up out of bed and sort of went down to his room and had a look at all the rooms. I thought maybe there's someone in the house, you know, an intruder or something. And raced down and had a look at all the rooms, and nothing there, nobody there.
A moment of peace, but a new terror was about to descend.
I watched this thing come across the roof of our room, hovering over us. I was screaming at my husband to get out of the bed because I said to him, that's the thing that was that night that chased us. It was exactly the same ship.
She said, that's it, that's it. I said, what are you talking about? I just go back to bed.
But Grace persuaded her husband to come to the window to see for himself. At first, he could not believe his eyes.
It wasn't an airplane. I know what airplanes look like. I mean, I've lived near airports, I've flown a fair bit. You know, you hear the sound. There's no way this thing just travels so slow and so low that it's an airplane.
Obviously, it had been above my home, and what made me more upset that it was starting to affect my children, and I had no control on it, none at all. You think that being a mother, you can protect your children, but I couldn't.
That was the last encounter, the last time any of the women saw those lights. The creature that confronted them that night in July 1994 never reappeared. But the mystery remains, and so do the nagging fears. No one has been able to give a satisfactory explanation. All 4 women are convinced they've been stalked by a UFO. They all know what they saw. It actually happened. And Grace's husband, he didn't believe the story at first. Now, he's a believer too.
They are about the place, and I felt then I can accept the fact that yes, you know, I've seen it with my own eyes, and you know, and they are there, yeah.
As for the women, they can only hope that their days and nights of terror are over.
I never believed in them. And, you know, they're just something out of a science fiction thing. You would never believe it until you've seen it. But I know differently now. I know that they do exist, and I believe it now because I know what's happened to us.
Out here at night, things happen that most people never know about. Lights glow, weird noises come from nowhere, and things vanish without trace. Other things appear, like strange crop circles, and no one knows how or why. You can see them. You can even touch them. They've been appearing in England for almost a century, but no one has been able to explain them. Swirling circles, intricate geometric designs on a grand scale that cut a swathe through vast areas of cropland. Theories abound. Meteorological forces, messages from out of space, a man-made hoax. All have been investigated, but the mystery of the crop circles remains as unfathomable as ever. And now, from outback Australia, another clue in this intriguing puzzle. These sounds were recorded in the very centre of one Australian crop circle, far from cities and from civilization. This is the first time they've been broadcast anywhere in the world. And even though the experts have played them over and over, fed them through computer after computer, analysed them and reanalysed them, the secret of these sounds has never been unlocked.
The difference between England and Australia is that our areas are totally remote.
John Ockertell, a commercial airline pilot, is one of Australia's leading researchers in this highly specialised field. He's seen the circles, heard the sounds, and investigated them thoroughly.
The main patterns we get in Australia are basically a complete flattening of the ring. In other words, the whole central process, the whole ring is completely flattened in either an anti-clockwise circle or a clockwise circle. Also, you'll find a star pattern. You'll have a large one in the centre, and to the outside extremes, you'll have 4 small ones. So there's symmetry involved.
John Ockertell is no newcomer to this research. He's been there since the beginning. The first circle was discovered in Australia in 1940. In the last 50 years or so, hundreds of crop circles have appeared in Australia, all of them in this remote 10,000 square kilometre area around the borders of New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria. Out here it's hot, it's dry, it's wheat country, right in the middle of nowhere. Just over that way is what they call the big desert wilderness. The nearest real town is 2 hours that way. This part of Australia is known as Sunset Country because of the red sandy soil. The white man found it hard to tame, but Aboriginal tribes have roamed here for 40,000 years. It's a land of legends and mystery, none more intriguing than the mystery of the crop circles. It's a mystery that crept into the lives of Rex and Nance Jolly in 1989. They're no-nonsense, hard-working country folk who have worked on the land all their lives. In the summer of '89, all their gambles and their toil was about to pay off. As far as the eye could see was the season's bumper wheat crop, ready for the harvest to begin.
When we hired the contractors to come in to strip our wheat, they'd stripped quite a few acres And then this morning they were sailing along down a rise, and they could see ahead of them these things that they'd never seen before.
Those things the contractor saw from his harvester were strange circles, perfect shapes, imprinted on the wheat fields. His first reaction was to call Nansen Rex.
He just said, "You've got to do something about this. It's once in a lifetime you'd see something like this." But we were amazed and didn't know what to do, we didn't know what we were looking at.
When they regained their composure, the first thing the Jollies did was take these photographs. The second was contact the expert, John Ockertell, who set off immediately for Sunset Country.
What we discovered was 11 rings. They were in a half-moon shape. The largest were at the top of the ridge, away from the homestead. And as you work closer towards the homestead and the fence, the rings got consequently smaller.
John Ockertell found that the wheat itself was not damaged in any way. The stalks were not broken, just bent at the base. Somehow, they'd been woven into an intricate pattern, something like a straw basket. As for the soil around the circles, it was sandy and soft as normal. But inside the circles, the soil was very different indeed. It was as hard as a rock. It was tough work taking soil samples. In fact, they had to use a crowbar to prise them free. The samples were sent off to Monash University in Melbourne for analysis. At first, the results did not look that promising. The soil was unusually high in iron oxide, but it didn't contain any strange elements. Then the researchers found a clue that sent them back to their computers for another look.
What we found was there was very little bacterial life, which is very unusual in soil. In the ring section, in the normal soil, there's a lot of normal bacterial life.
And there was more. The university computers revealed that there was an unexplained magnetic charge emanating from one corner of the farm, right where the circles had formed. Armed with this new information, John Ockertell headed back to the Jollies wheat field. He pinpointed the exact spot and began a new series of tests.
What we found was a ring. It looks like a coiled snake with a bit of a head on it, and it was very magnetised to the extent where if you ran a normal compass, which is very unusual, over it, it would swing the compass needle.
To this day, John Ockertell can't explain that magnetic charge. It, like the crop circles, remains a mystery. But there was to be one further piece of evidence that would prove even more mysterious. Another local farmer had noticed his sheep refused to go anywhere near one of the circles. And when he went to investigate, he heard a strange noise. A noise that literally made him sick. That farmer had the presence of mind to record the sound. What he captured on tape was this. The sound we played you earlier.
We then got that tape and went ahead and analysed, and what they did, they scrubbed all the machine noises and the noises on the tape, and they discovered there's a frequency of 5.12 kilohertz.
When John Ockertell studied the computer breakdown of the sound, there was another surprise, another discovery. The sound reminded him of one recorded by a BBC television crew while they were filming at the site of a crop circle in England.
A BBC crew attached a radio microphone to Pat Delgado. As he walked in the circle, it picked up mysterious sounds.
No, it's here. That's a terrible noise, just as you stand in the centre.
You're getting a noise there, Richard?
Very, very bad indeed.
Yeah, I can hear it here. I can feel it here.
This is our old friend back.
It is. Yeah.
Is it a pulse?
It's like...
I think it's about here.
An electronic sparrow, really, is the best description.
That's it.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, this is the same noises we're having analysed at Sussex now.
Just in the centre of the circle.
Now, the funny thing is that our sound is in the same range as the one that was discovered in England. So it's maybe very important.
But there's more to the Sunset Country mystery than strange, unexplained noises and circles that appear out of nowhere. It happened on a night just like this, 15 years ago. The sky was still and crystal clear. As usual, Eric Wilson and his two daughters were relaxing in front of the TV after a hard day's work in the farm. Their peace was about to be disturbed.
The dog started to make a very peculiar whining and howling noise. It was, well, I hadn't heard before, and I haven't heard it since, actually. I came outside to investigate what the problem was and saw this light above, over the dam.
Girls, come and look at this.
Eric's daughter, Jeanette, recalls that this blinding light shone over the farm for a minute or two.
We could see this object hovering in the sky with a flashing light on the top and a dome across the other side of the dam bank.
Then, just as suddenly as the light and the object appeared, they simply disappeared. The Wilson family reported the sighting to the police, who did make some inquiries. It wasn't the first, nor the last such sighting in Sunset Country. So, is there a link between the lights and the circles? Some say it's just too much of a coincidence. There has to be a connection. But in the realms of science, there's no such speculation. Even though most down-to-earth theories, too, have been discounted. They've said no to vortex wind drafts and whirlwinds because the wheat plants have not been damaged in any way. No to plasma balls and fireballs because there's no evidence of charring or burning. And no to animals because there have never been tracks leading to or from the circles. So, maybe there's only one way left to end the guessing game.
We're hoping in the future. We've got equipment up there at the moment, and last year, for instance, we had equipment available where we were hoping to see one formed or see the process. Once we get to see the process occurring, then we may be able to put a theory to it.
Until that day, one thing is a scientific certainty. Crop circles do exist. They have appeared in many countries: England, the United States, Canada, and Australia. The only problem is, we still don't know who or what is creating them.
It was not the normal type of trauma that you see on the road. It was definitely some other encounter that they'd come across. So these people were spooked.
What was it that so spooked a family driving along a lonely stretch of highway on the Nullarbor? No one can say for sure, not even the Knowles family themselves.
Well, the best way to describe the experience was, it wasn't like reality, it was just like a dream, but it was real.
You couldn't say there is anything out of the ordinary about the Knowles family, Faye and her sons Patrick, Sean and Wayne. But something out of the ordinary certainly happened to them on January the 20th, 1988. They were driving the 3,500 kilometres from their home in Perth to Melbourne. It was 3 a.m. Sean was at the wheel. His brother Patrick was asleep beside him. The desert was cool and clear as they entered Majura Pass in the middle of the Nullarbor. Then, out of nowhere, Sean saw it. A dazzling white light headed straight for them.
He told me, "Hey, Pat, wake up." there's something in front of us. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, wake up and check it out. He goes, look at that. He goes, it's a UFO.
Sean panicked, tried to swerve out of the way, but still the object bore down on them. But that was only the beginning. Sean put his foot down and sped off along the highway.
It chased us for about a half hour, and then somehow it got in front of us. It must went around us, and the faster we went, the faster this object went. And before we knew it, this object landed on a car.
Next, the unbelievable happened. To this day, the Knowles family are adamant that their car was actually lifted off the ground. If this is right, they were left suspended in midair. Sean, the driver, blacked out. The others became hysterical.
My mum was crying and screaming, just saying, we're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die. And all I just thought was, my God, this is it, you know. I just thought, why us? For God's sake, why us? And all I can remember then was we were dropped.
As the car crashed back to Earth, Sean regained consciousness. In terror, the family fled from the car and hid in the saltbush scrub. After a while, the object slowly moved away and the Knowles headed for the nearest civilization, the Mundrabilla Roadhouse. What they didn't know was that Melbourne trucker Graham Henley had been driving on the same stretch of road that night. He arrived at the Mundrabilla Roadhouse just before dawn, just before the Knowles family.
This blue Telstar came in a hell of a hurry. And these three young fellas and their mother jumped out of it. They were all talking at once. And the funny noises that one of them was making, he was obviously scared, witless.
In fact, the Knowles was so scared, Graham Henley didn't get around to telling them what he'd seen on the Nullarbor that night. A bright magnesium type of light.
It just swerved and veered all over from one side of the vehicle to the other, and I thought, what the heck's going on, you know? So I sort of accelerated a bit more and kept going, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. Just faded almost to nothing. Back it came again, and I thought, goodness knows, must be a helicopter or a roo shooter or something like this, having a bit of fun, and I never took much more notice of it.
But after talking to the Knowles family at the Mundrabilla Roadhouse, Henley did take notice. In fact, he and another truck driver drove back to Majura Pass, where they found evidence that seemed to back up what the Knowles had said.
Everything was exactly where they'd turned around, the skid marks on the road, where they'd hidden in the bushes. One of the boys had cut the tops of his toes in the gravel, and you could even see the little drops of blood on the gravel and the sand and stuff where it was.
The incident and the Knowles captured headlines around the world. The police were called in and the Knowles car was impounded. Experts tested it, but they could find no concrete evidence of an alien encounter. And so that was where the authorities let the matter rest.
No, I don't really think a lot of it has been investigated the way it should, but there was certainly, to my way of thinking, there was enough evidence to warrant a thorough investigation.
Certainly, something happened to that family that early morning.
Keith Basterfield is an independent UFO researcher, and he actually took the trouble to investigate the Knowles case. His report is exhaustive, but it's also inconclusive.
The manner in which the whole external factors came to deal with that family, in fact, probably has ruined us ever really knowing, because of the competing elements. The media wanting a quick story, sensational story, which is fine. That's their job. The police, who were disinterested once they found that they had a cookie UFO experience to deal with. The UFO researchers, because they couldn't really sit down to quietly explore the case. And the family themselves, because they suddenly found themselves the focus of an international effort when they were simply trying to get to Melbourne on holidays. I don't think we'll ever know.
Nevertheless, 5 years down the track, the Knowles family are still sticking to their story.
Oh, bloody oath, yeah. You betcha. They can think what they want, but I know what I know.
The The sky was dark when Seamus O'Farrell opened the throttle on his Navy jet and sped across the Australian outback. It was a routine night flight until he looked out the window to see objects flying in formation. Objects that shouldn't have been there. Seamus was so stunned he vowed not to tell anyone what he'd seen. That was until military radar operators asked him who his flying partners were. Aliens, he said.
The year is 1954, and 25-year-old Lieutenant Seamus O'Farrell is preparing for a lone flight, a flight that will haunt him for the rest of his life. It's the evening of August 31st, and Lieutenant O'Farrell has been briefed for a navigational patrol and exercise that will take him from the Nara Naval Air Station in southern New South Wales, west to Young, Temora and Yass, and then back to base. His aircraft, the Sea Fury, is the fastest piston-engined plane in the air. Top speed, 400 knots. A cool customer, Seamus O'Farrell is destined for high military honours. He's also destined for an encounter that is so inexplicable it remained in the top secret files of the Defence Department for more than 30 years.
I didn't think there was anything in there that was likely to affect national security, but other people obviously did.
39 years after the event, Seamus O'Farrell can talk openly about his mysterious experience. But back then in 1954, he was terrified it would wreck his career.
I was a bit ashamed about it all. People thought that I'd flipped my lid or lost control or done something silly. And it generally was regarded as a bit of a joke by the rest of the aircrew. You know, people would have a few drinks and they'd say to you, come on, let's have another drink, O'Farrell, and tell us a bit more about those flying saucers.
For the pilot, everything appeared normal as the Sea Fury took off from Nara and headed into the setting sun.
Nara base, this is Naviair 921. Could you confirm that there are no other aircraft in the region?
The actual tapes of the radio transmissions between the Sea Fury and Nara base have been erased by the Defence Department. But the conversations you will hear in this story are as close as we can get to the real thing. They are the recollections of the pilot, Seamus O'Farrell, and his link with Nara base radar operator, Petty Officer Keith Jessup. The first two legs of the flight were uneventful, but as Lieutenant O'Farrell turned into the last leg, Petty Officer Jessup noticed something unusual happening on his radar screen. Two strange echoes. Echoes that were closing in fast on the Sea Fury.
What these two objects were, I didn't have any idea, and I was concerned with the safety, so I reported to the relevant officer in charge of that area at the time.
A full minute later, Seamus O'Farrell in Sea Fury 921 realised he was not alone up there at 13,000 feet.
Base 921, we have you on screen with two other echoes. Can you confirm? Over. Naviair 921 tracking, yes, Nara 13,000 feet in close formation with two other aircraft.
They were formating with me. They were moving along with me and holding their station with me. And they were about the same distance out on either side.
Nara base 921, can you identify aircraft for us, please? Naviair 921, negative.
Try to picture Seamus O'Farrell's predicament. When he left Nara, he had been briefed that there would be no other aircraft on his flight path. Suddenly, he was confronted with the impossible. 2 unidentified craft, 2 brilliant white lights, flying in formation with the Sea Fury. One was about 30 metres on his port side, the other 30 metres to starboard.
At the time, I just knew that there shouldn't have been anything else there, and I brought the attention to the naval officer I set in charge and to our staff, and our staff in there were equally as surprised. We did plot on our radar screen all 3 radar objects, and it had to be something, because we wouldn't have got a radar echo, as we called them, back to the radar room had it not been a substance that reflected our radar beams.
Narrow base 921, can you execute a 180-degree turn so we can identify your position? Over. Nav 921, commencing 180-degree turn. Narrow base 921, complete 360, return to track. Over. Nav 921, roger.
By this time, there was a minor panic in the radar room at Nowra. They started checking and double-checking. The Air Force confirmed they had no planes in the air that night. Sydney Airport Tower reported there were no civilian aircraft flying in the area. And up above, the 2 objects were maintaining formation with the Sea Fury. Then after several minutes, they confounded everyone. They sped away into the night.
Narrow base 921, confirm echoes moving to northeast. Over. Nav 921, confirm aircraft have left formation on track to the northeast, yeah.
Then I saw the rate at which they were able to open up from me, fly ahead of me, cross directly in front of me and take station on the other side, almost in the flash of an eye, leaving me apparently standing still relative to their motion. And that's what made me think. I then stopped and thought about it and said, this is incredible. What sort of aircraft have I got out here? And I knew then, in my own mind, that there were no aircraft in Australia that could do that.
What sort of aircraft indeed? Remember, the Sea Fury was one of the most powerful aircraft in the sky. Back then in 1954, it could do an amazing 400 knots. After those 2 unidentified objects shot past Sea Fury 921, the radar operators at Nowra Base did some calculations. They estimated that the UFOs had to be travelling, really travelling, at over 1,000 knots. When Lieutenant O'Farrell arrived back at Nowra Base, there was a welcoming committee waiting for him. He was immediately ordered to sickbay for an exhaustive series of tests. The medicos questioned his drinking habits, his state of mind, his fitness, just about everything. But Seamus O'Farrell was given a clean bill of health. So clean, in fact, that he went on to become one of the Navy's top pilots and eventually naval attaché in Washington.
As the years went by, I became more embarrassed, and I just wiped it out of memory and never worried about it again. It was always intrigued me. It's always worried me. I saw no explanation, but I didn't see any need to tell anybody else about it or talk about it.
Despite his distinguished career, Seamus O'Farrell's file remained secret for more than 30 years. When it was finally declassified, the file revealed there were 2 more independent witnesses to the incident. An engineer working on a radio tower at Marulan in western New South Wales had sighted the objects as they flew overhead. And an air traffic controller at Sydney Airport logged unusual lights passing to the south of the city. The first civilian to study the file was UFO researcher and investigator Bill Chalker.
Again, one has to bear in mind the credentials that come with the sighting. You have a highly qualified and experienced pilot. You have confirmation from the ground from the radar operator. You have 2 separate ground witnesses, all confirming the presence of an unidentified or two unidentified aircraft of some description, and doing things that were apparently inexplicable or beyond the capabilities apparent at that time.
Seamus O'Farrell has no doubt what he saw that evening in 1954. And because of the evidence, especially the documented radar sightings, a United States government report rated this close encounter as one of the 13 most significant in the world.
To this day, I'm as certain as I was then that I saw two objects flying in close formation with me, and I'm convinced they weren't aeroplanes that come from the Navy, the Army or the Air Force or civil aviation. Whatever they were very fast craft, and they were very good performance.
Just your average home video. Doting grandparents capturing the antics of their favourite grandson.
Big boy now.
A Friday afternoon in the suburbs. It's summer, it's sunny. But there is something strange in the atmosphere. Something mysterious that appears on the video. An unidentified object flying overhead. An object that cannot be explained in any earthly terms.
We call it a genuine UFO, an unidentified flying object. Now, I want to clarify this. It doesn't mean aliens, you know, from Mars. It's an object of some sort in control. And you might say, why wasn't it a balloon? Well, apart from the analysis, we were able to identify, you know, by looking at it, that it wasn't a balloon, and also its height. Also, we checked with the Department of Transport and with the meteorology department to see when the balloons were launched, and there was nothing in the area. But this object is the most important quality of the object is there's some control to it, and it's airborne and it's solid, so it's unidentified in that sense.
Melbourne, home of the famous Melbourne Cup, the Olympic Games of 1956, one of the largest cities in the Southern Hemisphere. Hardly the place you'd expect to find stark visual evidence of a UFO. Pictures that have confounded international experts.
Big, he's very big and very naughty.
It's just after lunch on the 21st of February, 1992. In the backyard of his home in the Melbourne suburb of Endeavour Hills, Rex Sarakoglu is trying to tape his young grandson for the folks back home in Turkey. It's hot, and the star of the show isn't all that easy to pin down.
I love you. After I get tired, I have to sit, because he's very naughty all the time. I'm sitting there, my camera, my hand, video camera. I saw suddenly some bright light in the sky. I think to myself, what's this?
It was, in fact, a light moving across the sky. A light that Rex saw through the viewfinder of his camera. A light his wife Fatma also observed.
Looked like a ball on the sky. A very, very pearl color and moving.
Sometimes slowly moving, sometimes very fast moving.
One chance sighting, even when you know you have it on video, is easy enough to dismiss. But 6 days later, on February the 27th, at almost the same time, the object appeared again. And again, Rex had his camera handy.
After a while, he called me and he said, I saw the same thing again, come have a look. And I went and had a look, and I saw the same one again. And he told me this is the same one as last week. I said, yes, it looks like that.
By now, Rex Sarikoglu was really confused, and he felt he had to try to get some sort of official explanation. His search eventually led him to John Ockertell, a former airline pilot and an internationally recognised UFO researcher.
What we do, we take the film and then we scan it into the computer, single frame, which is digitised.
At the headquarters of Phenomenon Research Australia, and with the help of university colleagues, John fed the pictures into a number of computers. They enlarged, they analysed, they took atmospheric conditions, the location of the sun, even the condition of Rex's camera into consideration. And this is what the computer came up with regarding the first sighting on February the 21st.
Now in this case, we're right up on the object. This object here this is about 1.8 minutes of arc in width, and even at that blown up stage, there's no wing structure, no tail structure, and it's rounded. And when you put the rest put the line through it here, it's a flattened dome-like type of shape, but it's got the classical UFO shape. Varied in shape quite a bit. It was actually like spinning or toppling's the best word, around an axis. It's about 23 feet wide. It's about 13.4 kilometres from the camera at an average distance. And it's moving at about, its average speed when it was moving towards the west, away from the camera, was about 300 kilometres an hour. So it wasn't going very fast at all. That's why Rex was able to monitor it for quite a while.
Actually, Rex was able to monitor it for 2, maybe 3 minutes. But what about the height of the object? 13.4 kilometres is about 8 miles. And, according to John Ockertell, that's Concorde, supersonic territory. He says that kind of aircraft would naturally have been tracked by Australian aviation authorities.
Because at that height, when they get to that height over Melbourne, they must carry a flight plan, and there was nothing unusual, and there was nothing in the area at that time.
With more help from computer enhancement, John Ockertell was able to produce these remarkable still frames of the object. They helped convince him this was, in fact, a UFO. It was not a conventional aircraft. It was not a balloon. And as far as John could tell, it was not the result of a fault in Rex's camera.
We could find no emulsion problems or, problems with the tape. It wasn't a hoax, and the extraordinary thing to this was that it was a daylight sighting. That was the most important thing about this, and it's a genuine sighting.
Then there was the second sighting, the second video, taken on the afternoon of February the 27th.
So the times are very similar, and also the first and second objects are very similar in dimension and shape and doing nearly identical things, moving in also nearly the identical track. And you also note that they move off towards the antenna, then they both curl away and move off. The second one then moves off north, where the other one went west. But the interesting thing is it's nearly exactly the same thing, and he's captured the same UFO at different periods, one on the 21st and one on the 27th.
So what began as a simple family video on a summer's afternoon in Melbourne has become a scientific conundrum. The same object, in the same place, at almost the same time, sighted and taped.
When one person reports an encounter, we tend to dismiss it as imagination. But when groups of people in different locations report the same encounter, the whole world starts to listen.
I felt the most incredible fear go through me. It was like a power source of some sort. I was raving hysterically. I was convinced I was face on with the epitome of all evil.
A terrifying encounter of the worst kind. Blinding lights, towering figures with blazing red eyes, an overpowering sense of menace that ended in violence, a nightmare, or an attack by aliens. Kelly Carl knows what she experienced, and all the evidence points to a UFO and its grotesque crew.
I suppose some people might compare it to being raped, you know what I mean? It's such a shock to the system that it's something you can never forget.
Kelly Carl still bears the emotional scars of that encounter. So much so that she asked us to protect her identity as much as we could. Returning to the scene reopens old wounds, brings the fragmented memories flooding back. Memories of a terrifying night 2 years ago when she confronted unearthly evil.
Here's something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it does. It's as simple as that, it does. It exists. There's nothing anyone can tell me to say it doesn't now. Yet 2 years ago, if someone had told me that they'd had a run-in with a UFO, I suppose I would have thought they needed to be locked up.
A mountain road in August, the winter of 1993. It's around midnight. Kelly and her husband are driving home after visiting friends. Suddenly, a bright light pierces the darkness. Kelly's cozy, logical life is about to be shattered into a million mysterious pieces.
We kept driving for about 2 or 3 kilometres, turned a bend in a road, and there was a, well, I suppose you could say, house-sized craft sitting in the middle of the field. It was, it looked like round orange lights with some sort of blue fluorescent, I don't know whether it was gaseous or solid, underneath that hit the ground in a semicircle.
Even then, the words unidentified flying object, UFO, hammered at Kelly's brain. She and her husband seemed magnetically drawn to the lights, the craft, and whatever lay within. There was a sickening smell in the air. Waves of nausea crashed over them.
The next thing you know, there's a figure standing in the field, and then there was about 7 or 8 of them. Everything really happened too quickly. I went hysterical, I've got to admit it. I started screaming out that they've got no souls, and the next thing I know, I've been hit in the stomach and I've gone back through the air and landed flat in my back. I actually threw up through fear out there, but basically I was hysterical. There was some sort of conversation going on that I only got bits and pieces of. Funny little cliche lines like, we don't mean you any harm and we're a peaceful people, but at the same time I've been thrown back through the air and nearly had the life knocked out of me.
Then silence, darkness. The craft, the figures disappeared. Kelly and her husband found themselves back where they began, in their car, parked by the roadside. By Kelly's reckoning, the terror lasted just 10 minutes, yet in actual fact, more than an hour had gone by. An hour Kelly could not account for. The question is, what horrors occurred during all that lost time? It's a question no one has been able to answer. Not even John Ockertell, one of the world's leading UFO researchers, can shed any light on that part of the mystery. He and a team of independent investigators have studied the incident for more than a year, and they've reached some startling conclusions.
We try to knock their case over, and in the end, if it holds up, we believe the scales are in their favour. And in the consequence of Kelly's case, everything she gave us held true. And we were very confident that we had a good case on our hands.
John Ockertell's team asked Kelly to sketch her impressions of the craft and the flame-eyed figures she confronted.
As the drawings took shape, the images from that night returned to haunt Kelly's consciousness.
They were about 7 foot tall. They just looked black. I mean, I suppose like silhouettes. It was out on the field at night, but when their eyes lit up red, they were like red stoplights, like flies' eyes. They were that large on the face that they were like flies' eyes on a fly's face.
Kelly's scars from that encounter were not only emotional. First, there was the unexplained wound just below her navel that she discovered the morning after.
It was just strange. It was a triangle, and it was as if it was a burn, but not enough to blister it. But it was probably more impressive later on when the actual red went away and it left the outline of a scar there. And I actually took measurements of that, and it was a perfect centimetre every way. It was a perfect isosceles triangle.
Then Kelly's abdominal pains began. The initial diagnosis, an unusual infection in the womb, the kind that sometimes follows a miscarriage. But Kelly definitely was not pregnant.
And I was placed in hospital and placed on a drip of very strong antibiotics, and it seemed to clear up, but there was really no explanation for it all, and it was left as an open case at the end too.
Could the infection have something to do with what happened that terrifying August night? Could the aliens have... well, maybe that's too far-fetched to even consider. And far-fetched is probably the conclusion John Ockertell and his researchers would have come to if there had not been this breathtaking discovery. Kelly and her husband were not the only humans there. A second car was parked further down the road behind.
Inside the second car, a married couple, Jane and Bill, with a friend called Glenda. At the moment, they're not ready to tell their story on television, but they have given a full account to John Ockertell's team. An account the researchers have investigated and cross-checked against Kelly's version.
They believe that they've seen a UFO, in the true sense of the word UFO, unidentified flying object. They believe they've seen an entity, in other words, an alien. And I'm not saying this is a space traveller, but that's their belief. They believe that the incident did occur in the field, there's no doubt in their mind, and they believe that they were examined.
The same field, the same night, the same time, even the same feelings of nausea. But at one point, their experience does diverge from Kelly's. There was no fear, no hysteria, just calm. And the two women, Jane and Glenda, believe somehow they were transported from the field.
They describe them being in a craft of some sort. They're in a position where they're laying on their back. They can view the roof. They can just view the tip of their toes. They can see a group of faces. There's no speech. They can't see any. They can't speak. However, they can hear things going on, and they seem to be able to talk to each other, but they're not actually speaking.
John Ockertell's team asked Glenda and Jane to sketch what they saw. First, Glenda's impression of the craft. Now, Jane's. But wait a moment. Remember Kelly's impression? Almost identical. Next, the figures they encountered. Glenda drew this. Jane this. And this is Kelly's drawing of the alien with the blazing red eyes. These drawings help make the case unique. Two totally independent yet identical experiences documented and investigated by researchers. Rare data that they agree is unbiased and untainted.
Coming from two groups of people that had never met each other or spoken to each other, and both groups knew nothing at all about UFOs or ufology, it was quite a remarkable occurrence to both describe the same thing.
And there are other parts of the two stories that coincide. Just as Kelly lost more than an hour after her scuffle in the field, Glenda and Jane also have time they can't account for. An hour, maybe two. Finally, Kelly's scar. Glenda and Jane were injured too, but in their case, there's photographic evidence.
What you discover is that they have markings in their, just under their navel, some markings on the inside of their left thigh, and also on one of the girls they have a bruising above the left ankle, like a cuff, something cuffed around their leg.
In their search for the facts, John Ockertell and his researchers literally left no stone unturned. They went to the scene of the encounter, pinpointed by all three women, and took soil samples. These, in turn, were analysed by two different laboratories.
We found lots of unusual anomalies and also magnetic problems, and also lots of changes in the soil chemistry.
Those anomalies included an above-average sulphur content, the presence of a rare carbon compound called pyrene, also tannic acid, all in a crescent-shaped indentation at the spot where all three women said they saw the UFO.
Also, there was a triangle formation on the ground of dead grass, which is spaced out in the circle itself. So it gave us a lot of good leads that there's something had been on the ground, because the physical effects was now starting to destroy the grass in the area.
So what you have are two groups. Two stories, in most respects, identical. A strange craft, unearthly beings, medical evidence of physical force. But there is still one more loose thread to be tied. You see, all three women report there was a third car at the scene that night. The driver was a man, a witness who could hold a vital clue.
We believe he's still out there, and he'll be suffering like they all suffer with this lack of memory and this lost period of time, even probably to the extent where he thinks he's going mad, so he's still out there.
As for Kelly Carl, she's still trying to put her damaged life back together, still waiting for the emotional wounds to heal, still desperate to find the missing pieces that will help her understand exactly what happened to her that night in August 1993.
You know, I was a married woman with 3 kids. I was just an average housewife. I mean, now it's ruined my marriage. It's ruined my life. It's almost to the stage where I wonder if I'm ever going to be able to have a normal life, because somewhere along the line someone's going to know that, you know, this has happened to me. It's something you can't get out of your system. It goes over and over and over inside your mind every day of your life. You know, you're reliving it all the time.
It's a feeling Peter Curry knows well. A feeling he's had since a July night in 1988. As a young man on the move, the boss of a construction company, he's used to dealing with the real world, the tangible. That night, as he lay watching television in his room, he entered another world, a world of the intangible, the unknown.
All of a sudden I felt something grab me on the ankle, and I just got a sensation of pins and needles running up through my body. I was 23 years old at the time, and I thought, geez, I'm paralysed, and I got the feeling and the thoughts were going through my mind that I'll never walk again, and from that time onwards I'm going to be in a wheelchair.
Peter Curry couldn't move, but he could think, he could see, and what he saw when he looked to his right was like nothing on earth.
They would have been 3 to 4 foot in height, wearing hoods or robes, with hoods like a monk's robe, for example. They had like a very wrinkly forehead. They had shiny, dark face. Their skin was like a shiny, black, leathery look to it. Their mouths, their lips were pretty large, and they didn't make any noise or speak or anything like that.
And at the foot of Peter's bed, he saw two more figures, more hideous than the first.
They were taller, 7 to 8 foot tall. They had the oval, big, large black eyes, goldish coloured skin, pointed chin, very small mouth, like just a slit for the mouth, and 2 little holes for what nose or nostrils where they'd be.
At that point, one of the tall figures moved closer.
Then I noticed in his hand he had, I'd say it was like a needle of some type, a syringe, and he pointed it to the top of my head, right about there. And as he inserted it in, I mean, didn't feel any pain whatsoever. But as soon as that was inserted in my head, I blanked out.
This is Peter Curry's impression of that encounter. He says an encounter with aliens.
To me, they were alien, you know, in the sense that I'd never seen that type before. So to me, they were alien. They were from some other dimension, some other planet. I don't know where they come from. But it was a shock to have them in my room anyway.
The next morning, Peter found a scar, like a cigarette burn on his leg. He went to his doctor, and her diagnosis: it's impossible to say what the actual cause was. Peter Curry also talked to his fiancée about the experience.
I was explaining to her what happened, and I pointed to the top of my head, and when I did that, I just touched it, and under my nail there was dried blood. And she had a look, and she basically said to me, "There's a puncture mark there."
Peter's thought deeply about his experience. There's one aspect that baffles him. After the initial shock of the paralysis, he felt no fear, none at all.
I felt like they cared, I really do. You know, I really felt that the emotion that this being was projecting towards me was true and real. It wasn't imagination at all.
Kath Ross also felt an aura of calmness, of peace, during her brush with the unknown. That was more than 7 years ago. She was working as a photographic model, a career she's since abandoned.
The night that I got these marks on my head here, I was just home in suburbia asleep, and it must have been about 2 a.m. And there was a very bright light in my room.
Kath says it was like trying to look directly at the sun. She couldn't open her eyes. She saw nothing, but she felt 3 light touches on her forehead, 3 pinpricks. Then she too blacked out and slept until later that morning.
And I would walk past a mirror, and it looked like I had a tennis ball in my head. It was so huge. So I went straight to my doctor, and he took tests and couldn't understand why there was no pain. There's no pain whatsoever. And it took about 3 weeks before the swelling subsided, and it left me with these 3 scars.
Kath Ross says the doctor's tests showed no signs of poisons. Those pinpricks could not have been insect bites. She's still trying to come to grips with her experience. Like Peter Curry, she has her theories. All of them point to aliens. Aliens on a mysterious mission. One they both believe was friendly.
I think they've got a power to calm them down, because that's how I felt the particular night this happened. I was calm and went back to sleep, peaceful sleep. But I don't sleep that well anymore.
It's hard to explain, but geez, it happened, and it's as real as, you know, catching a bus in the morning to go to work, or a train, you know, and you don't forget doing things like that, and I just don't forget what happened to me.
Everything you've seen is documented fact. The people interviewed were not actors. They were the people actually involved in each story. Normal people who have had their lives turned upside down by the experience. Academics and scientists do not dismiss the stories out of hand. There are too many of them. Too many credible people saying the same thing. And too many governments seemingly keen to keep the lid on things. Are there aliens out there? Maybe. Goodbye.
I remember us all getting very smart and spick and span to be photographed.
But there was someone missing in the lineup, a young mechanic called Freddie Jackson. Freddie had died only days earlier, though not at the hands of the enemy. Rather, it was said he had walked into a propeller. His would be the one face missing from the photograph.
We all said we wanted a copy, and we were handed our copies. And there was quite a gasp of surprise because this young man who